Welcome into the Hot Read Podcast live here on Tuesday, March the 4th. I am your host, JT Ruhnke, writer and reporter here at the 440 Sports Podcast Network. You can follow me on Twitter, X, or wherever you get your social media at JT_Ruhnke. Finally back in Nashville after a whirlwind week at the Combine in Indianapolis, Indiana. Good to be back in Nashville with my co-host Stoney, Keeley, editor-in-chief of Sobros Network, one half of Football and Other F Words, and co-writer over at Stacking the Inbox. Stoney, how are you doing, my friend?
Pretty good, man. I don't know if it's supposed to storm out here or what, but this wind's blowing and sounds like the daggum roof's about to blow off my house. So if you lose me, that's probably why. There's something going on. It looks a little gray outside. I should probably be a little more heads up about this, but here we are.
Yeah, I mean, it has been very windy here in Nashville today. Maybe the winds have changed because there's
Look at you.
Quarterback one in the NFL draft now, which I will have to kind of eat crow today. I will have to sit in my sorrow and come and face the facts today. We'll get into all of that and more today. But before we do that, have to give a shout out to our sponsors, ML Rose Craft Beer and Burgers and Sinkers Beverages, two wonderful establishments here in the local Nashville area. More on them later. And a reminder, if you're watching the show on Twitter or Facebook, do us a favor and head on over to the 440 Sports YouTube channel where you can join guys like Paul, Logan, Jake, Coach Wills, and Eddie already in the chat getting ready to talk about what the Titans could potentially be doing with the 101, specifically after the NFL Combine week. And I want to preface today's show with, Stoney, we had this very big conversation, which I did not expect it to kind of blow up like that towards the end of the show last week, talking about what the Titans, where we are at with what the Titans could be doing with the first overall pick here. Potentially the different moves they could take, the different players they could take. And it seems we recorded that on Friday. And it was almost like this win, like, not to say winds of change again, but it truly was the winds of change after that. That's when the picture started to become even clearer for a lot of people in the national and local media about where teams potentially view these quarterbacks. And, you know, we were talking about, did one or the other necessarily separate themselves? And I think we got to the point there at the end of the show that not necessarily. They still have their flaws, but like both of these guys bring some different ideas to the table. And then all hell broke loose over the weekend, and one of the horses is now a couple lengths ahead of the other one. We'll get into all of that and so much more here. But the question I think we're going to get today is, can the Tennessee Titans still afford to pass up on QB1 in this draft, which is, Stoney, I'm gonna need to hold your hand while I say this, so I don't, fall to my knees in a Walmart or through a lobster tank or any of the Hot Read podcast isms that we've done here. Can they afford to pass up on Cam Ward in this draft? Because that is the story I left Indianapolis with, feeling the most confident in. That from everything I heard, outside of your kind of personal opinions on tape, the NFL views Cam Ward as the top quarterback prospect in this draft. And I know that, we were going to get these today. Kenneth, who has been on this train since December, saying, well, coach saying, no. And Logan saying Cam Ward, Will Levis is the Spider-Man meme. Coach Wills can't teach dog. I know, guys. I know.
Can't teach dog, though. You can't.
It's hard to say, but there is a clear leader in the clubhouse now between Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders, and it is Cam Ward. He is pulled very much away in public opinion, both, in consensus and behind closed doors. This is the Kenneth Crawl show today. Kenneth is going to be ruthless, saying Logan couldn't be more wrong. He is up and fired up today. Which is a change of pace from what we've seen Kenneth the past couple of weeks here. And, I think it's still very important to say that while Shedeur Sanders maybe is quarterback 2, quarterback 3, according to uh, Dane Brugler, some teams may not even have Shedeur as quarterback 2 in this class. I think the one thing when I say he is consensus QB1, and Stoney, you can let me know if your opinion has changed after everything we heard from Combine Week and whatnot. Um, there, to me, being the QB1 does not still mean that you are a top 5 or top 10 prospect in this draft. I think that's still very important to say. Like, just because he is now pulled ahead of this group doesn't mean that he is the best prospect overall. I still, no matter what, would have him outside my top 10 based on the talent in this draft. I don't know if that changed for you, but that's still how I'm looking at this for me.
My opinions on these two quarterbacks didn't change a whole lot over the course of the week as far as the actual tape goes, because the tape is still the tape. And I personally still think Shador's tape is better than Cam's tape. But where things change is when you something that we've been consistent on this whole time is that teams are going to get these guys in the meeting rooms and they're going to start sorting these things out. They're going to start working through the weaknesses. They're going to start getting to know the prospect, determining whether or not the guy's going to be a fit for their offense, for their organization, that sort of thing. And I think that's where we're seeing the separation, is that Ward had a better week of interviews than Shedeur. And ultimately, if we continue on this trajectory, which we can kind of get into the questions raised about Shedeur at some point in the show if you want to, but if we continue on this trajectory, Cam Ward is going to be the first quarterback taken. Doesn't necessarily mean he's going to be the best quarterback to come out of this draft, but he's positioning himself to where teams obviously, based on what we heard from last week, have fewer questions about Ward, the person, than they do about Shedeur Sanders right now. That feels like the reality of where we're at. But at the same time, I'm kind of with you. Like, it doesn't necessarily mean that he's the best overall player in this draft. I mean, I just think there are so many prospects in this class that have cleaner tape than him, fewer question marks. But, we talk about like Malachi Starks. You're not going to draft a safety over the quarterback if you need a quarterback at 1 overall. The positional value definitely weighs into the equation here, but I'm still hesitant to just buy all the way in, because I think it's good for the Titans for teams to think that they really do want Cam Ward. And now the sense of urgency hits all these teams that are trying to find a quarterback, that are now saying, well, Shadeur's not a fit for us, so we have to trade up to number 1 overall to get Cam Ward, because he's the only quarterback in this entire class that we believe can be a week 1 difference maker for our organization. I'm not saying that's what I believe. I'm saying that may be the trickle down impact on this. As far as the Titans go from last week, man, as these dominoes keep falling, quarterback after quarterback, and now we're hearing like Justin Fields, the Steelers want to keep him, the Giants are going after Aaron Rodgers, and all this stuff. Like, if the Titans stick and pick at 1 and they pick Cam, it is because they're really just pressed for options at this point, because we might be getting to a point where it's Sam Darnold, it's draft Cam Ward, or it's just eat shit for another season. And that's where I think this whole thing is getting really interesting.
Yeah, yes, I agree with you there. And I think the biggest thing that you talked about there, and Ross kind of alludes to this point as well, where he says, I don't think much actually changed because of the combine. It's just the media getting exposure to what the league in general has thought all along. I think that's a very big proponent of it as well. However, I will push back and say something that you said here about how important the interview process was for
Yeah.
these guys this week. And I think that is one of the things where you saw Cam Ward take the biggest leap. Obviously, it was the first time the Titans and so many other teams got the chance to sit down with him. And even though it was, 18 minutes or so, that's the first impression of him. Could we be potentially seeing what we saw with Shedeur Sanders at the Shrine Bowl, where that's their first impression of him, and that's where we get the glowing remarks. Now that Shedeur Sanders has had a second, meeting with a lot of these teams, is that where you start to see some of the discrepancies and get to know the person even more? Potentially, there's what like Callahan and Borgonzi and all these GMs and head coaches said, we're still very early on in the process. However, you cannot argue the fact that Shedeur Sanders had a terrible, awful, no good, very bad week for his draft stock. Going from being maybe potentially in the first overall discussion to now fighting to be in the back 6 to 10 picks in the first round. I think that's where we are with him. And it starts off with a lot of these things that were reported from a lot of people in the national media after the combine week. And I want to go through some of these things and kind of supplement with what I can confirm and also heard about, and kind of have that discussion about where Shedeur Sanders fits in the entire puzzle right now before we get back to the big discussion, which is Cam Ward or trade down, which is, spoiler alert, that's where it was always going to be headed. But, I do want to still talk about Shedeur because you can never say never. There are smoke screens. There are things being thrown around. It's lying season. We go through this every single year. You saw it with CJ Stroud and the S2 scores. This is nothing new. But Todd McShay wrote an article about what he heard regarding Shedeur Sanders and his meetings with a lot of these teams this week, in which he said, I spoke to 2 high-ranking individuals who work in personnel departments for 2 different NFL teams selecting in the top 10, each of whom was present for their team's official meeting with Colorado quarterback Shedeur Sanders. Both of them told me they came away unimpressed with Sanders' attitude during the meeting. One of them said Sanders wasn't taking it all that seriously. The other said he didn't have a professional approach. The general sense I got in talking to these 2 individuals is that they left the meeting feeling like Sanders wasn't overly concerned with what they thought of him, which, to be fair, is something you could have gleaned from his availability. With the media, right? Every single question that we were asking him about potentially going 101, what he thought of this, what he thought of that, was, I don't really care where I go. I just know the team that's going to pick me is going to pick me, and I'm going to give my all, as Johnny says here in the comments. Rappaport said the same thing. Joe in the comments here saying, what was their pick? What number? He didn't exactly report, but just said there were 2 teams in the top 10 who are quarterback needy.
Yep.
So, you can still reasonably assume that 10 moves down to what, 4 or 5, like half the teams, Titans, maybe the Browns, maybe the Giants, maybe the Raiders, maybe the Jets, those 5 are the most likely here that he heard that from. I can definitely say that what McShay heard, I heard as well, in terms of the vibes were off. And I know you went on RKW earlier this week and heard similar things to the effect of the vibes were off in terms that they shifted from what the impression was of Shedeur Sanders at the Shrine Bowl and in these first meetings with teams, I think is fair to say. Yes?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's coming from, there's a lot of smoke coming out of a lot of different camps right now. The words contrived, rehearsed come to mind. And to reiterate, McShay said somebody told him arrogant, that he just didn't seem to care what our team thought of him. So this is not just like one source. This is a lot of smoke coming up from a lot of different camps around the NFL that were there and met with him.
Yeah. And I think one of the biggest X factors here is how much Deion is involved in all of this, which I think is an interesting piece of the puzzle, because McShay went on to say, but here's why this story perplexes me. Deion Sanders has made it abundantly clear what he wants input on where Shedeur is taken in the draft. There's a lot of teams I preferred he didn't play for, Deion told Dan Patrick just before the Super Bowl. Deion also told Patrick he's already met with teams about their potential interest in selecting his son, so it's possible Deion is in command of their circumstances and working behind the scenes to secure what he thinks is the optimal destination for Shedeur. Deion is immensely knowledgeable about the NFL and the draft process, so I trust him to do his due diligence, and it's possible stories like these will have no bearing on Shedeur's draft stock. Once again, like grain of salt with all of these things, right? It's lying season. We've seen this time and time again with a lot of these guys. And people bring up the very big personality that a guy like Johnny Manziel was. You talk about similar things and where these quarterbacks could go in terms of draft, like the 2021 draft with Malik Willis, Desmond Ridder, Kenny Pickett. Like, how far do they fall? Like, we at the end of the day, we can hear things, we can talk to people around the league, but we still don't know what these draft boards truly look like at the end of the day.
Could we indulge ourselves here, though, just a little bit, maybe just a little exercise in gossip here? I just want to play the devil's advocate for a second. If you're Deion Sanders and you don't want your son to go play in Jacksonville, but you're well aware of the PR backlash of your son outright refusing to meet with Jacksonville, refusing to play for the Jags, that sort of thing, what's another way that you could get the Jags to not draft your son if you didn't want him to play there and also didn't want to face any sort of media backlash for him appearing to be a diva? And could you maybe bomb the interviews on purpose? I mean, I'm not speaking on any, this is just rumor and innuendo, I'm not reporting any information. I'm just thinking through this from a psychological perspective, because there's a lot of this that just doesn't make sense from what we've heard about Shedeur up to this point in the process.
And when you say that, I think that's something, because I can say factually from something I heard that there are questions about this go around. How much is Deion truly involved in his process now versus earlier? Yeah. Like, is this, Deion has his ways. He is no stranger to how the NFL works. There are teams who are, saw the vibes being off and truly question how much Deion is truly in the process, or is this advice from someone else? Is this advice he's getting from other places? Is he no longer going along with what his dad wants? Like, there are different things here at play that make this such an interesting kind of time period in the draft cycle. But I think it leads us to the fact that outside of the headaches right now, and from a consensus perspective, and from what I've heard from around the league when talking to league sources this past week, you just have to admit it. Cam Ward is quarterback one right now. And it's okay that that's okay, because we even heard from Shedeur. We heard from Cam say it would be great to be quarterback one or be the 101 or anything like that, like wherever I want. Shedeur was not necessarily, like, when you talk about playing devil's advocate like that, you go back and you hear some of those clips from Shedeur's media appearance where he's saying things like, I don't really care where I go as long as the fit is right to me. And you talk about his, I think you bring up something like a lot of people in the comments are bringing up here, his connection to Tom Brady, the location. Could it be possible that this is all a navigating to the point where they're aiming for Las Vegas to be the place that he ends up potentially? But I think as a Titan show, like, this is now a fact that, for me, in my opinion, and I wrote this at, my Combine Revelations article over on Stacking the Inbox, Cam Ward is the quarterback in the eyes of like the 101 right now.
Yeah.
The Titans. If they were going to take someone, even if they were going to trade back, like the quarterback they have their eyes set on right now is Cam Ward, in my opinion, which I think is, that's where I landed after Combine week.
I do want to say real quick, I wish I could remember who reported it, but someone, I can't remember who, said talking to scouting circles, it is now believed that Shedeur probably isn't going to go any earlier than 6 to Las Vegas. And I'm like, why'd they say 6 to Las Vegas? That's kind of curious, but here we are. Yeah, I think Cam separated himself for multiple teams as the guy you trade up for at this point. It kind of strikes me as like Shador's the guy that you're going to play the patient game with. You can afford to play the patient game with. But if you want Cam Ward, he's established himself as the top quarterback. And he's the guy that if you want him, you're going to have to pay a premium to go get him.
Yeah. But here's the thing, right? And we'll get to some of these questions here as well, because we appreciate you guys being here in the in the comment section today. So many of you guys, and if you're joining us on Twitter or Facebook and want to get in the conversation, like so many of you already are, head on over to 440 Sports YouTube channel where we can interact with you. Do you think? And this is kind of going off track, but I do want to get to mostly Cam Ward discussion because I think that's where we are right now. If this truly is a smokescreen, is it plausible to say that there's still potential for the Titans to say drop back to, I don't know, anywhere between 3 and 6 and take a guy like Shedeur?
Oh man, I don't know. Well, first of all, I live off the track, so we can go off track as much as you want to. I don't know, man. I never say never. I mean, they still are probably going to need a quarterback. Like that's what I talking about at the top of the show is that there is absolutely a scenario where they lose out on the Sam Darnold sweepstakes. There's no Aaron Rodgers. He goes to New York, and you're looking at like picking up off the scrap heaps of Zach Wilson and Jarrett Stidham to come here. If you need a guy with some upside, yeah, if you find the value and you prefer Shedeur to Cam, and this all was just a smokescreen to think you could move down to 3, still get your guy and pick up some extra picks. I mean, I don't see why that isn't plausible right here in the height of lying season.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you there. We'll get to some of your questions here and comments, but not before we thank our sponsors, ML Rose Craft Beer and Burgers. 7 wonderful locations in the local Nashville area with Capitol View, Franklin, Gallatin, Melrose, 8th Avenue, Mount Juliet, and Sylvan Park, with a new location coming soon to East Nashville in Inglewood. Stoney, I know you went there for a little date night last week after our show on Friday.
I did.
It's still the ultimate sports bar restaurant eating experience to watch a game, have one of their over 25 beers on tap, and select from a amazingly long menu of their starters, from their pretzel bites to hot Nashville cheese curds, any of their sandwiches or salads, but most importantly, the craft burgers that they have, including their new burger of the month, because we are in March, the Stout Burger. Stoney,
Yeah.
I know you had that with you even added bacon, taking it a step further. Well, just give us your first impressions of the new burger of the month.
It is a fantastic burger. I went Friday night. It was still technically February, so I was hoping to get last month's burger, but they had already switched it over to the Stout Burger. Fantastic double patties, caramelized onions, smothered in beer cheese. I mean, that thing is soaked in their beer cheese. It's supposed to come on a pretzel bun, but I don't think they had the pretzel buns Friday night, so I got a regular bun. No big deal for me. I added bacon to it. That was off the tip of our server. She's like, you can add bacon to this if you want to. And I was like, well, sure. Why would I not add bacon to this stack of meat and cheese and bread? So I did. It was fantastic. It was the perfect meal. Got the waffle fries, some barbecue sauce to go with it. And of course, you already mentioned it, but the wife and I started out with the pretzel bites, the best pretzel bites in the game. You get them with the cheese and the horseradish. Do some double dip in there. Everybody's happy. Fantastic date night.
Yes, and if any of that sounded good, and it should, because why wouldn't it? It's
My
just
mouth's watering now.
absolutely unbeatable. Head on over to mlrose.com to find a location near you. Stoney, we can get to some of these comments here right now. Firstly, we can talk about Kenneth, who, once again, it's been Cam Ward, it's still Cam Ward, and will still be Cam Ward, and they will screw it up if they trade down. We're going to get to that in just a second. Drew saying he's been a Ward guy for a while, and he's still 18th on his board currently. He's with me in saying that just because he is the quarterback now, it doesn't necessarily mean that he is the top prospect overall. Jason in the comments here saying, I've posted this before, but am I making too much of Callahan saying at the Senior Bowl that Shedeur Sanders has a financial perspective because he has been paid money? Certainly in this world of NIL now, and coming from that family, I think there is more incentive for him to bring other factors in that could be deemed red flags or to a team trying to pick him to maybe influence where he is going. Like we just said, like there is this unknown element, I think, still at play for a team like, you know, a what's the word I'm trying to say? A group like Shedeur's camp is the word, like to make that play in driving up as much controversy as possible to, and then, you know, going to maybe a Raiders meeting, maybe a Jets meeting, and being like the perfect little princess in his meetings, right? Like, just because we heard from two different teams that said he bombed or whatnot, does not mean that the other ones he did the same thing, right? I think that's an interesting part of it as well.
What if his plan backfired? He was trying to talk money, but nice guy Brian Callahan just flipped it and was like, "Oh, this is actually a positive thing because he has experience with money at this point. You can't get any past nice guy Brian Callahan."
Yeah, and Joe brings up an interesting point here where he says and I kind of alluded to this on Friday's show about how Shedeur's plan right now is kind of like how Eli only wanted to go to the Giants. Like, there's some big time personality being at play here. You know, I think that is still very much the case. Joe says he definitely takes Shedeur at 3 or make the Raiders trade up to 3 for him. Maybe
double trade down.
It's hard to do, but could you? I mean, I don't know. That is an interesting idea there, which then brings us to the Richard says the reports about Sanders is most likely coming from teams that want him to fall, which at the end of the day, like I said, grain of salt. All of this is very much a grain of salt because it is lying season. And just like we were having these conversations with guys like, you know, CJ Stroud and the likes, there's always going to be that kind of element here. Drew, taking us off the rails again, saying Jalen Walker at 6 after a double trade down. That's spicy. I
like it.
Can I offer a double trade down with a Michael Williams picked up?
Okay.
Okay. That's where my head's at. You know, but that's personal preference between the two there currently. But
how about a triple trade down and Josh Simmons? Can we entertain that idea?
We do a quadruple trade down, and how about we fix the right side of the line with the first pick and go with Josh Simmons? How about that?
There we go. I love it.
Yes, and so that brings us to the discussion, right? Cam Ward is QB1. There are teams that want to kind of separate the two, maybe for the selfish gain of Shedeur camps wanting him to fall versus the Titans, in this case, wanting his stock to rise so that he potentially could become more intriguing and enticing here. This is the big question for me. And we already got a bunch of comments here. Can the Tennessee Titans afford still to pass on a guy like Cam Ward at 1? And basically right now, where I stand with, in my article at Stacking the Inbox, I kind of ranked the outcomes between, you know, trade down and then selecting a guy like Cam Ward, Shedeur Sanders, Abdul Carter, and Travis Hunter right now in terms of likelihood, in my opinion. My top 3 would be trade down still 1, which is what I said on Friday, which I'm sure I'm going to get some flack for that. Even after everything this week, trade down at 1, Cam Ward 2, Abdul Carter at 1-3 is where I stand right now. And I think that's the discussion, because once again, we're still in the process of figuring out all the different types of ways that how they can supplement the quarterback position, right? We just got past the tag deadline. So Sam Darnold, who, in my opinion, I believe to be down to 3 teams realistically, being the Minnesota Vikings, who were reported, even though they're not tagging him, still want to get a shorter term deal done with him. So you have the Vikings, you have the Raiders, who we just talked about potentially having a lot of interest in a guy like Shedeur Sanders, and 3, the Titans. I do believe that his market has kind of shrunk to those 3. And it's because we've heard so much talk about how the Giants really, really do want to come up and grab a guy like Cam Ward at 1, saving face for the front office and the coach. If he works, it saves their jobs. If not, it is what it is there. That's the question to be asked, I think, in my opinion, right here. Trade or Cam. And I tweeted out that I think right now, if I was the GM and you had to ask me, I'm still trading out. And I think Eddie says it best here right now. He says, Ward is not the level of prospect you can't skip on. No one in this draft is. And like I said on Friday, this team is nowhere near close to being just a quarterback away. There are concerns, in my opinion, that if you bring a guy in like Cam Ward, as good of a playmaker and makes the wow factor plays, do you have enough right now surrounding him in terms of receiving core, in terms of offensive weapons, in terms of protection, to get the good out of Cam that you need to be successful in year 1, versus the negative effects that you could have on a guy like that, who has a really glaring turnover-worthy throw rate and turnover-worthy play rate, a guy who, is more used to playing out of structure in potentially a structured-based offense that Brian Callahan runs. Like, is that enough to set him up for success right now at 1? Or are we still at the point where this team is practicing patience? They potentially want to trade down, continue to bring up the value of a guy like Cam Ward, trade out, supplement with a Justin Fields, a Sam Darnold type, and kind of move on, unfortunately, to next year. Like that's where the 2 sides are right now. And that's the question, I think, if to me, is that if you think that this team can immediately get back to success with a Cam Ward and the surrounding draft capital and the money that they have right now, then I think you take him, right?
Yeah,
but to me,
sure.
I think that this team still does not have the capabilities, with having only 2 top 100 picks, with so many holes to fill, with the kind of free agent market they have out there right now. I don't know if it's possible to see the success that people would want to see out of Cam Ward in year 1.
Yeah, I'm with you, JT. Couldn't have said it any better myself. I'm still in camp. Trade back. I would love for this team to sign Sam Darnold. Perfectly fine with that. I think this is probably, I look around the NFL, I think this is probably the second worst, if not the worst roster in the entire league. And so I have been kind of trying to brace people to think like we're at rock bottom right now. This is likely not going to be a quick turnaround, and it's going to take some time. There is a risky proposition in taking a prospect like Cam Ward, because I agree, like, he has his warts. He has his red flags that I don't think he's this generational prospect. Joe Burrow is the popular comparison right now, where it's like, you knew in January you were taking Joe Burrow if you were with the Cincinnati Bengals. That's not the case. He's not that kind of prospect. He still has issues. He still has flaws. And there absolutely is a scenario where he comes in, the roster's so bad, they're disaster in 2025 again, and Brian Callahan's fired, and now you're hiring a new coach, and there's a new system, and suddenly, we're changing things up on Cam Ward, kind of stacking the deck against him. And that is kind of the darkest timeline, of course. I think, there is a scenario where he comes in and he's the guy that we saw at Miami, just winning games off of his own heroics and that sort of thing. But I'm not so sure of it that I'm willing to gamble on it when I am in a position where I need contributors. I need starters across the board. I need a lot of draft picks. And right now, this is my most valuable asset in gaining leverage to acquire more picks. So I'm kind of with you. I'm team trade back. And it doesn't mean that they couldn't take Shedeur Sanders there. It doesn't mean that, they can't find one of these guys that they do like later on in the draft. I think there's more than one way to build a team, and I just don't think that you take the quarterback because you feel like, oh, we've got to have a quarterback. You can't compete without a quarterback. That's how teams make mistakes and end up with like Mitchell Trubisky's and stuff like that. So I'm preaching patience here. I'm saying do the due diligence. If you feel like Cam Ward can be that guy, great. But don't pass up the opportunity to build your team out a little more thorough.
Yeah, I agree with you there, and I'm glad that we're getting back to this discussion earlier in the show because once again, it's a hard pill to swallow. What we're the angle that we believe this team is at right now, where we're coming from. Right, I think for Titans fans who had to go through what Will Levis had last year, I get it. Right, it's very, very tough, but at the same time, I think you make a great point. The desperation factor in getting a quarterback to get a quarterback, a Mitchell Trubisky, a Daniel Jones type, taking Justin Fields as well, like all those different guys, taking a Josh Rosen at the top of a draft or in the top 10, right? I think it to me, it's not always black and white. There's a lot of different nuance that is going to happen from
For sure.
offseason to offseason here. And let's get to some of your comments so that we can talk a lot more about this in depth. Paul, to begin the show, said, if the Titans could potentially afford to pass up on a guy like Cam Ward, he said, absolutely. Trade to 3 and take Hunter. He believes that's the path to salvation.
I'm with you, Paul. I'm with you.
Is an interesting one. Christopher says, not a serious franchise if we trade down, which I think is a little strong in my opinion. Jason saying, I'm not convinced Ward is a golden quarterback god, but I'm entirely convinced he'll be better than the future draft placement options, i.e., is he better than the 3rd or 4th best quarterback next year? Now, if we had to take that, right, you're looking at a quarterback class of guys like Garrett Nussmeier, Carson Beck, Drew Aller, potentially Arch Manning, like
Cade
I don't
Klubnik,
know, like
Lenore Sellers.
Lenore Sellers, like if you had to ask me right now, if I'm taking Drew Aller next year and trading back, or Cam Ward this year, I'm taking Drew Aller.
Bro, it's easy for me.
It is to me too. And, it's unfortunate that we have to wait another year, but like, I think you're asking me is he better than the 3rd or 4th best quarterback next year? If you had, and there's so much time to change these things, right? But like, if it shakes out that Arch Manning decides to declare next year, Garrett Nussmeier takes that next step in his development, going back to school, Drew Aller makes another step in development, like though that is a class more deserving of being 3 of the top 5 picks, not to mention, can Carson Beck kind of salvage his career? What Lenore Sellers is, the kid out of Arizona State, what is he? Like, there are
Sam
so
Levitt,
many
maybe.
the Sam Levitt, like there are other options, I think, out there that, to me, in what this Titans team can be in a year are more intriguing. And I think I saw this comment earlier. The bottom line to me is that there's more, like, even if you take Cam Ward, there is a bigger likelihood that you are just back here at the top of the draft next year with Cam if you didn't have him at all. Like the chance is still very likely that this team, I think, is still at the top of the draft, in my opinion.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I think some of the people in the chat need to go actually watch some Drew Aller tape too.
Oh, are we getting some Drew Aller, some Drew Aller hate here in
We are.
the chat? Jay asks us that Aller is trash and we are bots. Apparently, that is some Gen Z slang I've heard in my comments. I haven't heard in a
Yeah.
long time here. Hurricane Lou says the Titans still pay the quarterback premium for Ward at 1 in the opportunity cost of no trade down. That's the biggest thing here. And I think before we continue with some of these comments, that's the big thing, right? There's been a lot of talk about what exactly you could get for the 101. And now there are many different trade charts out there, right? There are different styles of trade charts and how you do value, but ultimately the one that a lot of these different ones still get mixed into is the Jimmy Johnson trade chart, whereas Tennessee for that first overall pick is around 3,000 points of value. To get to, just a baseline trade where, you look at the Giants, number 3, number 34, and 101 in this, or 104 in this draft, in the 2025 draft, that gets you to 2846 worth of points. You bring in the desperation factor. If you were to get a 1 next year out of that, a 3, 34, 104, and a 1 for, say, the 101 and a pick for the Titans, I think you do that trade, to me, because I think the opportunity cost there of moving back, still getting a top player like a Travis Hunter or an Abdul Carter, and having that draft capital to go all in on quarterback next year, while potentially still being able to supplement your team this year with a short-term contract, Sam Darnold, a stopgap that can probably provide more consistent play than Will Levis. Like, I think that, to me, is what you do.
It sets a steadier foundation to build upon for the future. It's not such a volatile outcome as ending up with Cam Ward as your quarterback of the future.
And I think there's still something to be said about people saying, well, you're really going to give Sam Darnold $40 million. Joe points us out that Daniel Jeremiah and so many others today reported that Sam Darnold probably is not getting close to $40 million a year on that big time, more like Baker Mayfield contract, right? I don't think that's happening, because what we've heard is that there are teams who watched the last 2 games of Sam Darnold last year and say that, right, this may have been a 1-year wonder. Not to say that he hasn't improved, but to be paid $40 million, you have to win in those clutch moments, and he wasn't able to do that. But he still is, I think, a league average quarterback, and I think you can pay for a league average quarterback around maybe what Ryan Tannehill got in his last couple of years. $27 million, somewhere around there, I think, is a fair price for something like Sam Darnold, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I just really, I would reiterate that I think the Titans are in a spot now where they're tearing things down to the studs. I mean, they are rebuilding across the roster from the ground up, rebuilding a culture, everything. Like, this is ground zero. It's rock bottom. They need assets.
Yeah.
Also, I just want to ask Drew, like, what about that Stanford to Oklahoma transfer? Because I was watching some Alec Iomanor. I don't know how to pronounce it. I was watching his tape, and I was like, dang, man, is this kid from Stanford actually something? Like, is he gonna be something one day? So that's just, we don't have to go down the rabbit hole of the Stanford quarterback, but just, Drew, hit me up in the DMs. I want to chat about him.
Yeah. Ed says, call me crazy, but I don't want a reclamation project at quarterback when we already have one. Rather roll with Levis, parentheses, ducking. I think, listen, if people in the comment section, like, agree that Cam Ward is better than every quarterback prospect that could come out next year, when the league consensus is that this is a down year at quarterback, and league consensus from people I've talked to in the league thinks that next year's quarterback class is better, like, we're not going to get anywhere, unfortunately. And
Yeah.
there's nothing more I can say about that to change your mind. That is what is being said right now in league circles, because I just was Indianapolis and I was talking to teams about the difference in quarterback class from this year to next year. And so if you want to disagree with that, that's fair. And I think that is your opinion and you're entitled to your opinion, but I don't think that's how teams see it. And I think that there's more options next year. And if you are the Titans, who you can go back to looking at kind of the message that is being preached with this Titans team, once again, in a sense where it seems like Amy Adams Strunk is taking a step back, putting Chad Brinker as the voice of the team from a football perspective, bringing in a guy like Mike Borgonzi, giving Brian Callahan another year, another shot with potentially a better roster after this acquisition cycle. There is reason to believe that this team, even if they were subpar again in 2025, are still going to be okay with where they are headed into next year in 2026. Like, even if they do end up being bad again, it may still be in the cards for them that was the plan all along.
Yeah, and JT, it goes back to what I've been talking about this episode. Like, I feel like there's going to be a sense of patience with this rebuild. I don't think they're going to do anything rash. And it's not to say that drafting Cam Ward would be rash, but I feel like they're going to be a lot more calculated in their moves. And I think, and I don't know if you've heard different, you can correct me on it, but the sense I get just from talking to people is that they want to really lay a foundation for a successful future. They want to acquire draft picks and kind of build the team the right way. I feel like where I'm at right now, I wouldn't draft Cam Ward unless I absolutely had to.
Yeah. I mean, and the Titans may want to, right? Alex in the comments here brings up a very interesting point that I want to touch on before we get out of here today. And we'll get to a lot more of your comments before we head out today. But he talks about, maybe the best course might be taking Cam and trading out of the second. In my opinion, if you take Cam Ward, which I also wrote about this on my Stacking the Inbox article, if you take Cam, there's no way in my mind the Titans stick at 35.
Yeah.
You have to trade back at some point in this draft. And whether it's in the first round or whether it is in the second, you have to. It's just the way this team has talked about how they want to build their team, the way they've talked about how, they need to build it the right way, the way they've talked about, even if Chad Brinker might have said that wanting 12 top 100 picks in the next 3 years is a little overblown, or, 12, whatever it was. This team still needs a whole heck of a lot of help, not just in the quarterback spot. They still need a half of an offensive line. They have one good receiver, one proven receiver who's now 30 years old. They have holes at the edge rusher position, on the secondary, in the middle of the defensive line. Could they still be on the cusp of needing a new option in the running back, with Tony Pollard getting up there in age, with Tyjae Spears not necessarily working out? Like, there are things coming down the pipeline that they also are going to need boxes checked at for this team. And so if they do take Cam Ward, and I don't, Kenneth wants to say that I'm being bitter about Shedeur Sanders being QB2. I'm not. I think if they were to take Cam Ward at 1, that's fine. Like I've said all along, I think they just need to be convicted on that opinion of him, that all parties involved need to believe that that's our guy and that it is worth taking him now versus potentially what's coming down the pipeline in terms of a franchise's longevity. And if they truly believe that, like consensus and like everyone from the combine that I've talked to has kind of come to realize, that seems like Cam Ward is that top QB prospect, and they feel convicted, I'm fine with the Titans taking Cam. I just think that there's still so much work to be done after taking Cam for this team to get back to relative success. And someone in the comments here, as I try to scroll up, we appreciate you guys being here in the comment section today, that, that with kind of average quarterback play, this was an average team. I don't find that I don't think that's true at all last year. I mean, you saw what this team still did with a guy like Mason Rudolph, someone who took a Pittsburgh Steelers team to the playoffs the year before. He comes here, wins one game, throws almost as many interceptions as a guy like Will Levis last year. Like, just because you're getting probably maybe average quarterback play in Cam's year one to maybe some of those wow moments doesn't mean that you're going to fix this next year with just one offseason. I think that when you look at what teams like the Commanders have done, what the Texans have done, those two quarterbacks went to those teams and were taken in the top 5 without question. There was no question that those guys were going to go in the top 5. There's been questions all along about where Cam Ward fits in terms of what scouts view in this total situation. And I think it's very, very tricky to differentiate that, right? Like, you look at what CJ Stroud was able to do in his first year. You look at what Jaden Daniels did in his first year and say that the first quarterback taken off the board this year, he's got to be at least as good as that guy. Why can't he do that for our team? Like it's not an apples to apples comparison.
I think you're right. And to that point, it's interesting. It came out recently. I don't remember who reported it, that there were teams that had looked at this year's class last year, and it factored into them moving up to get a quarterback or taking a quarterback because they didn't want to end up in this class needing a quarterback. And so it absolutely is something that I think will factor into it. Like, this has not been a great quarterback class for a long time, for a year. And yet now all of a sudden, because Cam Ward is maybe the best of the bunch, it's changed to, well, if he's worthy of the overall pick, he should have the same impact on our franchise as a Jaden Daniels, a CJ Stroud, Caleb Williams, that sort of thing. And I just don't think it's the case. I just don't think he's that prospect.
Yeah, I agree with you there. Now it does, I hear this all the time, right? And Ed brings up, or who is this? Logan says in the comments, more likely Levis starts week 1 or the Titans draft outside the top 10. I think it's more likely that the Titans would draft outside the top 10 than Levis starts week 1. Let me just make that abundantly clear. Like I've said all along, just because they move on from Cam does not mean that there's a different path at play. Sam Darnold is still very much out there and is still, the Titans are most likely in the top 3 in contention for a guy like Sam Darnold. You look at the same argument that you made with, if we get average quarterback play in this room, we're an average team. Can a guy like Justin Fields, Russell Wilson, Kirk Cousins, any of those guys bring you average quarterback play in a year where you trade out of the number 1, get yourself average, and have that pick to maybe move up and go all in on a quarterback, which Jay brings up that as if that is some is fireable offense, that you should acquire picks so we can ship them all out to hopefully move up for a quarterback next year.
They might not have to move up. They might not have to move up.
We've seen this many times. Like, this is how the NFL works. And so I think Team Ramrod even saying, remember when I said it was going to be Mac Jones last week? Whose quarterback coach did they add to the staff?
He's on one.
Reported by Paul Kaharski earlier today. Like, that is very much still at play. But at the bottom line, which now that the Cam Ward, I guess, craze has settled down just a bit, what would it take?
I'm sorry, JT. I'm just going to ask, like, what do you think this fan base is going to do if they pass on Cam Ward? If Cam Ward is not a Tennessee Titan night 1 of the draft, are there going to be riots?
It's such a fine line, isn't it? Like,
I mean, people seem mad. Like, is
there anyone who people are mad, and I would love to know. I just don't. I'm still having trouble in my mind processing that. Once again, as I've said, I may have preferred Shedeur Sanders in this draft cycle for the most part, because I thought from a scheme fit, Sanders fits more than what Cam Ward. We moved to Combine Week. I say Cam Ward says he met with the Titans and that he feels like the scheme is a lot similar to what they did. there's some possibility that they can work. We heard Brian Callahan talk about working with the flaws, working with some of those warts, so to say, to get a generational prospect and something out of that, right? That is a franchise guy. I'm not saying that he is a generational prospect, but getting a franchise guy out of that for years to come. Doesn't mean I hate Cam Ward. I'm just asking in terms of what this team needs to be for the future, and maybe that's it. The disconnect between the absolute terror and PTSD that Titans fans look at last season and say what they saw from Will Levis and say, we cannot do that again. We cannot even come remotely close to that, versus what this team wants to be, which is a perennial contender in the long run. Like, sometimes you just have to take your medicine for you to get better and sit with the suck. And I know that this team has sat with the suck for 2 years, but it finally feels like there are other factors that are no longer at play, and that this team feels like they are more aligned. Amy Adams-Strunk is more out of the picture. Like, this is a team that is ready to operate football effectively and consistently at a level that they believe is perennial contender level. But once again, when you make those changes, the clock starts over and you have to suck again and again and sit through that more and more suck until you have that consistency. And unfortunately for this team, like, there is a possibility that that is the case. And I heard earlier today, it was on one of the 104.5 shows. Like, would you rather have Will Levis go somewhere else and like be a good quarterback for another team, or see like Cam Ward, like, which is worse, that the Will Levis outcome or Cam Ward being good for a different team? Like, is there like, which is worse?
We're
I think
down
there's
bad.
one even worse than both of those, which is you draft Cam Ward with 3, you don't find a trade partner at 2 in the second round. Cam Ward, his warts really show at the NFL level, and now you're really, really stuck.
Yeah.
Like,
oh boy.
Like, that is the worst outcome in my mind.
To me, it's just an interesting observation, because it felt like a couple of weeks ago we were all just kind of like lukewarm on Sam Darnold. The fan base was kind of divided. Some people like Shedeur, some people like Cam, and now it has just devolved into, if the Titans don't draft Cam Ward, we will all become the Joker. And I'm like, when did this switch happen? Was it just the combine? Everybody was like, oh, he did good in the interviews, therefore he's the guy. I don't know. It's just interesting dynamic at play.
Listen, Kenneth says, because Stoney of all people knows, if Cam Ward goes elsewhere, he will succeed, and we look like clowns yet again.
It's the Titans' black cloud, the Titans' curse.
Is there a world in which the teams that would trade up for him, being the Giants, being the Jets, being the Raiders, all these teams that are also like perennial laughing stocks, share the same sentiment? I don't, obviously, being a Titans fan, Stoney, that probably makes more sense to you than it does to me. However, like, I don't know. There still is some doubt in my mind that Cam goes somewhere else and immediately turns around that team. Versus, like, to me, there's still a lot of possibilities in which Cam Ward, the Titans, get a haul for Cam Ward, which, by the way, we've gotten so kind of caught up in the Cam Ward, is he good, is he not, why do you guys hate Cam, you have to take him conversation again, that to me, the only way that you trade out of this pick and don't take Cam Ward is if the Giants don't budge on, say, their first this year in 2 seconds. Like, that seems to be the asking price right now that has been floated around, a first in 2 seconds to move up from 3 to 1. I don't think that's enough, personally.
No, I don't either.
I think you have to get a 1. And I'm with you all on that. You cannot move out of the first overall pick to move to take if you don't get a 1, I think. Now here's the other thing, Stoney, that's just popped into my head. Are Titans fans going to be more mad that they trade back and pass up on a guy like Cam Ward? Or would they be more mad that they have the first overall pick and still stick and pick a guy like Abdul Carter or Travis Hunter?
Oh man. The city will burn to the ground, I think, if that happens. if they they somehow manage to neither get Cam Ward or extra picks for the rebuild, I think that was you're trying to incite a riot on this show, JT.
Yeah. Coach calls me sick. I'm just
JT is sick.
I'm offering real conclusions that how is that sick? We are 2 months away from the draft still.
It's
And,
a possibility.
Still on the table. But that's real interesting, right? I think. I think it's still real interesting how pigeonholed a lot of people have become on it is Cam or bust. Like
I think Curtis puts it very reasonably in the chat. Shout out to Curtis. Curtis is a real one. Think majority of us just want a young quarterback to build around, tired of the retreads and projects. I think that is the sentiment. Like it's been a while because even Will Levis was drafted to be the guy, but I think there was a pretty strong subset of Titans fans that were just like, well, hashtag never Levis. Like he was still a divisive pick. The fan base is still arguing about Ryan Tannehill, and then you're going back to Marcus, and he never really took that next step. Like it's been a long time since this team. I mean, goodness, you think like Jake Locker and Zach Mettenberger. It's been a long time, and I think that's why, in my opinion, like people want that to be Cam Ward. I just don't know if Cam Ward is really that guy, you know?
Yeah. And once again, not to restart it, but like there are other options close to what people believe Cam Ward is this year in next year's draft that it makes it maybe easier to go and get your guy. You don't have to take the guy because he is the guy. You can go get your guy. You look at what the Chiefs did. They didn't take Patrick Mahomes. Like they moved up to like at what pick 10
10
to
or
go
11,
get their guy because he was their guy and wasn't necessarily this consensus quarterback one overall. It wasn't the best prospect overall in this draft. Now, could it be the devil's advocate once again? Could that be the best of both worlds? He's not the best prospect overall, but you still have the first overall pick. I think it's still very possible that the Titans feel, once again, I'm going to say this word because I think people just don't. The Titans are convicted enough to say that he's our guy. They should take him because that fits the best both worlds, that he's maybe not the best prospect in this class, but when you have the opportunity, you take him. And I think that is where we stand on it today. Get to some of these other comments before we finish up here today. Team Ramrod brings up, the real Joker mode is when they stick and pick Shamar Stewart. That's something the Packers do, I think, which I think is interesting. There's a lot of mocks out there saying that also. I want to throw out before we get out of here today.
You've already poked him enough, JT. My goodness.
People are saying that with the 35th overall pick, the Titans should definitely go wide receiver. I asked them to think about who is running the draft board. The two guys at the top that are running the draft board being from the Chiefs and the Packers. It ain't happening. It ain't happening. The Titans, I will stand on that hill. The Titans are not drafting a wide receiver in the second round this year.
I like that. I hadn't even thought about that, JT.
I think that's where I stand on that. So like, once again, at some point in this draft, you have to trade back, whether that's at 1, because you get the haul that makes the Giants desperate enough to come up and take a guy like Cam Ward, throwing in that next year first, or moving back in the second to potentially end up getting another day 2 pick and supplementing maybe with a third round wide receiver or something like that. I think it's somewhere along the line you have to do that. Roshan says if they pass on Cam Ward, it'll be fine unless Cam Ward is awesome, lol. But banking on next year's QB class is insane. It's not very good. Maybe a year away. But that's also what we were talking about at the beginning. Like if you go back to 2021, I feel like we were having the same exact conversation about why are you guys looking towards next year's quarterback class? Like we're here, and then you see what that turns out. Johnny says, what if no one calls at 35? Like that's where I get really concerned. because as much as Cam Ward can be good, like if you only have 2 top 100 picks in this draft and you have to take Cam Ward and then you have to decide between getting a young edge rusher, a solid solution at right tackle, a wide receiver,
Oh boy.
which I don't think they're going to take. Like, I don't know. If you don't get, like, I feel like I've said this, Stoney. Correct me if I'm wrong, but if you don't get the Hall, who is the pick at 1? Did I not say, like, I'm on board that if you don't get the Hall, the pick is Cam Ward?
I think
Nope.
that's what will happen. Yeah. And
Like,
yes, you did say that. You did say that. Yeah.
like
Maybe Alex was late to the broadcast. We don't know.
So I don't know. There's been a lot of different takes being around. Richard saying worst case, trade out and get a Hall and find out the front office can't draft. I think that would be very interesting as well. Roshan says exactly. You can't tell, so don't bank on it.
It's a robust class, though. I think, like we've known for a year, it was pretty much going to be Shedeur Sanders and then somebody else, and Cam Ward really rose up. But I mean, right now, like we're talking like 4 or 5 guys deep, 6, 7, even if we want to throw Nico into the conversation. Interesting traits. Not sure where he is as just a quarterback, but I think it's a more robust class that you could probably at least say, you know, somebody, they're not all gonna just completely shit the bed in 2025.
Yeah, I agree. And so I think that's where we'll end it. Here's the thing, right?
You don't want to keep talking about Cam Ward in circles for another hour?
I want to just say one more thing. I'm interested to go back to this live stream, say in a week and a half, if the Titans were to sign Sam Darnold, how much the conversation changes.
I think it changes quite a bit, and people are going to be pretty pissed.
I think it'll be very, very interesting. Drew says, do people know we actually have tape on the 2026 guys? You're allowed to watch them?
Yeah.
Interesting, which I do want to bring up. I talked about the Titans having to trade before we get out of here. I talked about the Titans having to trade out one way or another, which is a great segue to plug that my mock draft 1.0 will be coming out on Wednesday or Thursday. Not sure yet. I have to do that. But we've also been getting some people have been DMing me asking if we could potentially do some mock draft nights where we do very chill, throw up a mock draft, talk through it type things, both full first round as well as a Titan 7 round. I think, Stoney, you may be able to join me, but I think I'm going to be doing one Thursday night where I just hop on my own personal Twitter page, have you guys come in, crack a beer, have a little bit of a happy hour, and throw up some mock drafts, and we talk through more of this stuff in maybe a more chill way. So those will be coming to you pretty. I want to do those if people are interested. Kind of just talk through some mock drafts and talk about that with people. Maybe take people's input into that, and we make decisions as we go along. Want to do those probably maybe once a week leading up to the draft. I think that's an interesting idea. We appreciate you guys for offering that and wanting to see that from us. So we'll look out for those. We'll probably put a tweet out later this week if we end up doing one of those. So be on the lookout for mock draft 1.0. Stoney, have you done a mock yet? Do you have one coming out soon?
I do the shitty PFN mocks because there's like no rules on those things. And I just go in and I accept every trade offer and see how many players I can get. So far, I've ended up with, I think one of my mocks I did 22 players, but I just do it as like a tongue-in-cheek way to show how shitty PFN's mock draft simulator is.
Yes.
Because it pisses me off. People post their mock drafts and it's like, we're getting Nick Emenwari in the 4th round. And I'm like, no.
I saw someone today get Carson Swessinger at like 124.
Yeah, I'm like, what are we doing? You guys, you're setting yourself up for disappointment if you buy into those things. I don't know if PFF is a little more accurate, but PFN is just ridiculous, man. Like I got Anthony Belton in like the 7th round the other day. Just like, what are we doing here?
I love it. So yeah, that's probably what we'll talk about on Friday's show, mock draft 1.0, along with whatever crazy weirdness, as well as potentially anything we maybe hear from Cam Ward's 30 visit. If anything were to happen there, could be interesting. He does meet on Friday here in Nashville, along with a lot of the other top prospects this week and next week, getting all of that stuff in before free agency. So will be very exciting. Thank you to ML Rose Craft Beer and Burgers and Sinkers Beverages for sponsoring the show. Until Friday, where we talk more draft and get even deeper into the weeds before free agency. This has been the Hot Read Podcast. We will talk to you then. Have a good week, everybody.